Hi, all. This is your Professor Ian. This is just an update for week 5 of your creative writing course. I hope you all had a good and safe America Day weekend. I didn't really do much. I have 2 little kids. We just had a pool party here around the house. And what else did I do? I can't remember. I did some kind of yard work. Oh, I was working on some sprinkler stuff. Yeah, but fun. We had a little barbecue at home. Anyways, that's what we did. Hope you had fun too. So, just a couple things about this week. I'm not going to mark your journals until later this week because I want to get through your stories first. I'm still marking story number 1, getting through all of those. I hope to have those finished by Wednesday, maybe Thursday, depending on how many I get through each day. We'll see how that goes. So if you don't have feedback yet, don't be shocked or surprised. I'm still working on those papers. So just hold tight for that. Should be done by Wednesday, Thursday, like I said. So let's talk about the stories from last week. People seem to really like these 2 stories, which is great. Maybe a break from the Hemingway from the week before, which people didn't seem to like as much. I thought Naomi had a funny comment where she sounded really surprised when she said she actually liked it, meaning when she was talking about the false gems, as if she's not used to liking the stories we read in the course. So that's fine. I think by a fairly narrow margin, the false gems won for everybody's favorite story. A lot of people liked All the Things You'll Never Do as well, which was good too, because this is the first time I taught that story. I really like that story a lot, and I think I'll talk about this. False gems and All the Things You'll Never Do. They make a great pairing because of the narrator's voice, right? In the false gems, you get this kind of clinical, playful irony. Like there's a joke at the center of that story. The narrator is in on it the whole time and is revealing it a bit by bit to the reader, right? And you can tell that there's this kind of like ironic distance to that narrative voice and the tone that the narrator uses. The narrator could tell you exactly what the wife has been up to right at the beginning, but instead we get to learn this along with Monsieur Latin throughout the story, and that it creates this kind of it's about the humor of that situational irony when you realize all these things, and then the dramatic irony too when you see Latin falling to pieces or becoming I don't know, dislikable by the end of the story, right? I think you sympathize, at least when I read it, I sympathize with him at the beginning of the story, and then throughout the story until we get to the end where then he turns into this like jerk who has all this money, but he's been through some trauma, so I'll forgive him. But anyways, I don't like him by the end of the story is what I mean. On the other hand, you have All the Things You'll Never Do, where like I don't like Bess in a way, but at the same time I sympathize with her a lot because she's dealing with insecurities and her position in the world, right? She doesn't have much, right? She doesn't have any money. She doesn't have a stable family for her son, right? She feels like, she doesn't have all the things she wants, right? So she clings to this authority, this false authority that she has through her job, or it turns out to be false authority because she's literally stripped of that authority at the end of the story, right? And as Stevie mentions, with Beth, she's constantly criticizing everybody else for doing exactly what she's doing, right? The things that she does is okay, but when someone else does it, she criticizes them, right? But at the same time, because of the narrative voice, you both, at least for me, I both dislike Bess and I like Bess. I empathize with her at the same time. So there's an interesting difference in how these 2 stories are constructed and the irony that's used to fuel that, right? Because in All the Things You'll Never Do, there's this strong sense of dramatic irony. There's no real situational irony, except maybe the ending when she gets stripped of her authority she's literally stripped by her bosses, right? She has to literally give up her uniform, which is this thing that she cares so much about. But most of it's dramatic irony, right? Where you can see that Bess is making poor choices and trying to deal with her insecurities, whereas she doesn't seem to see it that way, right? She doesn't seem conscious of how she's being perceived by the reader, right? That's classic dramatic irony. And that's what drives that story and really plays with how you sympathize with her. So it's a really fun story to, I think, juxtapose with the false gems. So it's more about the false gems. Annalie did a good job of talking about the central metaphor of appearance and gems. that is kind of the central metaphor of the story, right? The title tells us that, right? As I've said in I think this week's lecture, think about titles when you're reading stories, because it's often the way the reader is giving, or the writer is giving you a hint what you should be paying attention to in the story. And there was some debate in the perusal about where this money is coming from or where these gems are coming from. And I feel like, I love teaching this story because it is a joke. This whole story is centered around the infidelity of the wife, and how the husband finding this out, and it's humorous. It's meant to be like cruelly humorous. You have that one scene that the narrator spends a lot of time on, where the wife is draping the supposed false gems all over her husband. She knows they're real. He thinks they're fake, and he's just like, oh, you have such bohemian tastes, which means she's like free spirited, like likes gaudy jewelry and all that kind of stuff. But she knows it's real, and so she's like putting all this real jewelry that she got by maybe not sleeping with other men, but entertaining other men, and spending time with other men, right? That's where they're coming from, and then she's draping it on her husband. And so when you reread it, it's got this like cruel irony to it. And, if you want to make a claim that she got the gems somewhere else, we're never actually told where she got the gems. So there's no like conclusive textual evidence that would support my claim that she got them from being unfaithful to her husband. However, there are a whole bunch of clues in the story that point to only that conclusion, right? We're told that she came from meager means. She didn't have a family that had money. There's no reason why she would keep that secret from her husband, right? She also is able to manage the household on his meager salary, which he can't do after she dies. That's because she has another income from the men that she spends time with, either selling the jewelry or they give her money as well. And she uses that to support her household, right? So without her stream of income from her infidelity with other men, he can't keep up the household. There's also the scene when he's selling the jewelry in the jewelry store and they realize it's real. The author used the word knowingly twice to describe how the shopkeepers are looking at Monsieur Latin. And when they're looking at him knowingly and they're smirking at him like that, they wouldn't smirk if they thought that the woman had some inheritance or something, right? They know exactly where she got these gems, right? And he knows that the shopkeepers know by the end of that, and that's why he's like lowering. There's the description of him with lowered eyes saying, "I have more jewelry," right? So like everybody knows what's happening by this point in the story. So the infidelity is supportable by textual evidence in a way that like inheritance or something just is not. Also, the central irony of the story doesn't work if it's not from infidelity, right? If she's not cheating on her husband. The whole joke of the story is that she's a false gem, right? That she seems this simple, virtuous young woman who just has a taste for gaudy fake jewelry. Then it turns out that she has this whole double life, and who knows how far that goes. Maybe she was just using men to get money to support her husband. Maybe she really loved her husband that much. Who knows? That we can't say, but definitely she's getting these gems from this other way of doing that. And that's what gives the end that really humorous bit too, right? Where Monsieur Latin first, he sells the jewelry and he gets into the wealth. And if you notice that scene too, notice how he keeps exaggerating how much money he has, because he's become, this kind of foolish character by this point, right? And then at the end he remarries, and he marries a virtuous woman with a violent temper. She doesn't cheat on him, but she's also not pleasant to be around. So this is kind of the author's joke, right? You can either have this woman who's a false gem in that she is pleasant to be around, but she's doing whatever behind your back, or you can have someone who's faithful and true, but terrible to be around, right? So it's maybe also a bit sexist too, right? The whole story. You could read it that way. It's definitely open to that because it doesn't leave much room for women. I would describe it more as like, what's the word I'm looking at? I'm missing anthropopic. Sorry, just pessimistic about human nature in general. Sorry, I can't think of the word I'm thinking of. So I'll just say pessimistic about human nature in general, because Monsieur Latin also is a bad person by the end of the story, right? When he realizes these things and he gets money. So nobody is spared. Nobody is good in this story. So anyways, that's I love teaching that story. And again, all the things you'll never do is a lot of fun because it's got this unique narrator who's both third person and yet taking us inside first person into Bess's world, right? So we both sympathize with her, and yet we're standing outside judging her at the same time. So it's this really interesting use of that dramatic irony, right? Because we sympathize with her, and yet at the same time we're watching her make these mistakes. Or there was some conversation in the perusal discussion about that, about her ironing her clothes, right? And the narrator, and this is what I was talking about with tone and narrative expectation. Notice how the narrator focuses our attention on that ironing stuff for so long, right? It's obviously important, and it shows us just how concerned with the superficial symbolism of her authority that Bess is, right? This whole thing about the starch and ironing her clothes, right? And there's several paragraphs about this in this story. So, this is a way that the narrator focused our attention and to both help us criticize, understand the dramatic irony of Bess, and yet we sympathize with her. I sympathize with her. I mean, I don't obsess about ironing my clothes or anything like that, but she's like clinging to this symbol of authority that she has in her life because she doesn't have a lot, right? And so, it's this interesting situation, right? And a couple people I noticed that Andrea said that she felt sorry for Bess by the end. Yeah, I mean it's natural, and Naomi even said she wanted to cry for Bess when she's literally stripped of her authority after she gets fired, right? And then she literally has to strip off her uniform at the airport, and this uniform, the very first line of the story tells us how much this uniform means to her. So to be stripped of this by her bosses is just like the ultimate letdown for Bess, right? Okay, anyway, so those are the two stories. I'm glad everybody enjoyed them. You could definitely write about one of them for your short story response. Your first short story response is due this week by Sunday. This is just an opportunity for you to do a deeper dive into one of the stories, because we don't get to really, we do our discussion, you do a little flip grid, but you don't really get a chance to reflect more fully on a story. So that's what the responses are for. So if you want to think more about that narrative voice in all the things you'll never do, or the irony and the fun twists of the false gems, that'd be great. Or you could work on the dialogue in Hills Like White Elephants. Any of the stories, you could work on something. But that's due this Sunday, and there are instructions on Canvas along with a video. Also, your proposal for for story number 2 is due this week. So please do look that over. If you have any questions, please let me know. We can talk about it. We can meet in my office hours online. Please do think about your story. I'm going to post the instructions for the what am I calling it, portfolio later this week probably. The portfolio is something due at the end of the semester that's requires you to revise your 2 stories and think about the choices that you're making. So I'll post the instructions for that soon. And as usual, there are a couple readings and journals to finish this week. Who was it? Oh yeah, Sabrina said that she liked the 2 stories last week because of the lack of happy endings. So Sabrina, you're gonna love the stories this week. One of them is a real tearjerker. So enjoy your week. Please do email me if you have any questions or concerns.